Hey there guys, welcome back, it's ARTFX, and today I'm going to be doing another one. This is going to be about the reese bass. This is part 2 in a series about how to make reese basses. So today I'm going to be working a bit on the reeses that I made in the last video. So if you haven't watched that video yet, go to the description below this video. I'll put a link there to part 1 where I actually create the initial patch and where I create the initial reese sound. Now, today I want to look a little bit into what you can do after that, how you can actually take that reese, that classic detuned saw kind of sound, and turn it into a really heavy reese for drum and bass or neurofunk. Now, the main thing I want to talk about today in this video is about stereo width and processing the reese so that it becomes usable in a track. Now, I've got a project here. It's a blank project except for these two things. I've been playing around with the reese a little bit. I'm gonna create a new audio track because I want to show you a little bit something. We've got the reeses right here. So these big reese in it are the ones I created last week, and I went in and I exported them to audio. So we have that. So those are the reeses I made yesterday, I think. But I thought that maybe the movement in these reeses is a little bit too quick, a little bit too fast. The thing is, when you're making bass sounds, when you're making reeses, it's a good idea to just make slow modulations early on in the sound design process. So when you're actually making the initial sound, just stick with really slow automations and really slow movements, because you can always create the faster and quicker movement later on, but when you already have a really quick movement, you can't slow that down. You will have to stretch it or stuff like that, but that's not going to be that good in terms of bass response. Your bass is definitely going to get lost when you're going to stretch a bass sound out. But the thing I thought is maybe I should start with something a little bit slower. So I went in and I actually bounced down another set of these reeses, which is actually the same patch. I just changed the detuning amount, or I changed the LFO speed just so that I could slow down the movement in the reese. So with those reeses I had just a moment ago, I now also have these ones. So I now have these reeses with a slower movement, and I really like number 4, so I'm gonna take reese number 4. And when I now look at this, there's one thing that we can already see, and that is that there's a huge difference between the left and the right speaker. You can see that they're basically moving in opposite directions. So the reese here, in terms of volume, it goes a little bit to the positive side of the waveform. Being if this is like the middle part of the waveform, like imagine a line going right here through the middle. You can see that line right here, by the way. That's the middle point. And you can see that during the reese, we're above this middle line is the positive side, and below this middle line is the negative side. So you can see that we're kind of like moving to the positive side, and then we're going past that middle line and going into the negative side. And it's doing that on the left side of the speaker, but on the right side of the speaker it's actually doing the complete opposite. So it's actually going to the negative side first and then going to the positive side. That isn't really a problem yet. It kind of depends on what you're gonna do and what you're gonna make. But if you're gonna make a bass sound, this will actually be a problem, because what is gonna happen is when this goes into the positive side and this goes into the negative side, they're gonna cancel each other out, and you don't really want to have phase cancellation in your bass sound. At least not a phase cancellation this big. You can have like a little bit of detuning in the high end, you know, maybe have like a really solid mono reese and then add like a little bit of detuned saws in a little bit of a higher pitch on top of them to kind of like create a feeling of stereo width, but the main bass sound is most of the time mono. So I didn't really pay attention to that in the previous video, but to be quite honest, this bass will give us problems. Now, I can try to show you what happens when you actually sum this to mono. So, I think I have already a device on my master. So I have a device right here called Manipulator, and you can see that I flicked the mono switch, and what that is gonna do is as soon as I turn this effect on, it's gonna make this completely mono. Now, you can do the same thing with the Ableton utility, although I think it's not really a complete mono, it makes it mono, but I think the way it does that, it doesn't necessarily sum it to mono, it just takes the average of both sides, I guess. So yeah, it's gonna cancel each other out, but I know for a fact that this manipulated device really turns it to mono the way it should, you know, when you do it on a hardware mixing desk or anything like that. So it's just the fact that I don't really trust the utility when it comes to the stereo width, and especially when it comes to summing things to mono. I just think it sounds a little weird sometimes. Now, let us just listen to this reese. I'm going to put my headphones on so that I can actually hear it as well, because I'm really wondering what is going to happen when we turn this reese into a mono sound. So this is the reese by itself. And it sounds good, but it does have a little bit of a weird sound. It's really wide, basically. I think this was the one I made in Serum, and Serum has the tendency to really become super wide because that's how Serum is made. You know, when you put like two voices in there, it's gonna be really wide, just right at the bat. And sometimes you don't want to have it as wide as it becomes right off the bat. You might want to actually have it a little bit more mono. So let's turn this on and let's listen to it now. You can hear, if I just play we're losing a lot of the sound. It's not like we're just losing a little bit of high end or we're losing a little bit of stereo width in the high frequencies. No, we're really losing a lot. We're actually losing pretty much the gritty sound in this reese. So that's gonna be an issue. You know, you might be working on this reese and think like, oh, this sounds really heavy, that gnarly, distorted kind of sound in the low mids. I really like that. But when you put this in a track and then sum it to mono, which will happen when your track gets played live in a club, then suddenly we've completely lost that sound that we liked from the bass. So that's why you really, really should pay close attention to how your bass sounds in mono. Now, how can we remedy this? How can we actually make this reese work and still keep the sound that we have? I mean, we don't want to lose the sort of like the character that we created in this reese. Well, it's actually really simple, and the way to do it is we could do a couple of things. I think we could flip the polarity on this one. But then again, when we sum that to mono, it's still gonna cancel it out. So, what do we need to do to actually turn this into a good bass sound? Let's put a utility on the reese track itself. And I'm gonna go and choose, instead of stereo right here, I'm gonna choose the, well, first I'm gonna check out how it sounds when we flip, so when we turn it to mono with this one. Okay, so that actually tells me that the utility does sum it to mono in a good way. It sounds perfectly the same, so I could actually just delete this one and use the utility. It's probably a little bit easier on the CPU, but the whole thing I wanted to talk about is how you can actually turn this into a good sounding reese that is going to sound good in both mono and stereo. On the reese itself, I have a utility now, and right here it says stereo. When we click that, and a little drop down menu comes up, and we can choose from 4 different options. Now the ones I want to actually talk about, or I want to try out in this particular sound, are the left and the right option. So what this is going to do, I've now set this to left. What now is going to happen that both the left and right speaker are going to be playing just this top one. So if we would split this up into mono files, so we would split it up into a left channel and a right channel, and then just put the left channel on both the left and right tracks, then we would get what we hear now. So essentially what it's doing is just copying over the left side to the right side, so that they're now actually both the same. So now we have a mono sound. That's now perfectly mono. So when we when we flip this to mono now on here, we should hear the exact same sound. See? So now we have a reese. It is perfectly mono. It still sounds gritty in the low mids, but when we switch this track entirely to mono, the reese sounds exactly the same. As when we compare that what we had earlier, it will completely cancel out. So that's why having your basses in mono is really important. And I can say, let's say I want to have a little bit of stereo width, and I can maybe add like a high-passed version of this reese. So if I would duplicate this track, and on here I could, for instance, switch this back to stereo and go into EQ8 here, take out most of the low frequencies so that we just have that, and now just play them back together. Now it does change a little bit when we switch it to mono, but it's not really changing too much. It's just changing it ever so slightly, which is not really a problem. The biggest issue is when it's actually going to change it so much that we're cancelling out a lot of the low end and a lot of the low mid frequencies. I don't care about the high frequencies. The high frequencies can get a little bit washed out. It's not a problem. But the low mids and the low frequencies, that's where the real issue is. And I think by doing this, we're now going to be able to have a really complete mono bass that's still going to sound good when we turn our track to mono. So, let's just get rid of this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check which one of the two sounds best. I think I like the right one more. So let's go with the left one. I can freeze this and flatten it, and now what we should see is that we have exactly the same thing in both the positive and in the negative side of the waveform. We're still having a lot of volume changes, but that's not going to be an issue. So I'm going to unfreeze this a little bit right now, because what we're doing, we're also increasing the volume a lot. And I might also want to do that, so we're changing the volume a lot as well. Let's freeze this and flatten that, and now you can see it just flipped. So this one is now actually sounding good. And when we go into this track right here, which is the reese I was playing around with earlier, so that's sounding a little bit better now. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna delete these tracks, and we're now gonna turn this reese into something good. So what can we do with this reese right now? Let's just... It's sounding a lot better already. The fact that we turned it to mono has really helped. So let's see what happens if we process this a little bit. I'm gonna add a little bit of distortion to this reese. So let's try out Sound Toys Decapitator. It's a really good distortion / saturation plugin. I absolutely like the sound of that one. And that's also a thing, you know, I don't always immediately go for isotope trash or something like that. Multiband distortion is good, but you don't always need to use multiband distortion. I always try a single band distortion first, and only if that doesn't do what I want it to do, if I can't achieve with a single layer distortion what I want, then I'll switch to isotope trash and go into the multiband mode and use it that way. But let's try out a single distortion first. Okay, and now let's compress the shit out of this and see if we can actually flatten this whole sound out. Okay, that sounds good. Let's freeze and flatten this one as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna flatten this and see what happens. So it has actually flattened it out a little bit, but I think we should put this in a MIDI track now. So there's a couple of things we could do. You can go with the Ableton Live sampler, which is probably the easiest way to turn this into a good sounding Reese. Or you could use Contact, which is a little bit more complicated, but also gives you a little bit more options, has a bit more effects included that you could use to turn this into a good Reese. So let's do it with sampler first. I'm gonna drop this file into sampler, and I'm gonna turn this track off, and I'm going to switch this to an F note, F1, and let's turn on the pitch envelope, because the start of each note needs to be a little bit more in your face, I guess, a little bit more pronounced. So that way we create kind of like a transient. What I also like to do is bring the volume up a bit. And you might be wondering, compared to that sound we had earlier, we're losing a lot of high end. Well, if you ever wonder why you're losing high end as soon as you drop a bass sound into sampler, or any sound basically, that's because by default the filter is turned on onto the low pass filter, and it's actually filtering out quite a bunch of the high frequencies. It's set to 22K, but I think it's kind of like rolling off high frequencies from 15K and up. So you're actually losing quite a bit of the high frequencies. And if we turn that filter off, it's back. So I'm gonna switch this to a notch filter. And I'm not really paying attention too much to the low frequencies right now, because I'm always gonna add a clean sub underneath this bass later on, to really make the sub frequencies strong enough and don't make them fluctuate in volume, because that's what's gonna happen right now. We have, as you can see in this sound, a lot of volume changes, and that is pretty much the sub that is doing that. So it sounds a bit better already. Now, one of the things that really is going to change this up is I'm going to switch to the pitch mode here, and I'm going to turn glide on, and let's bring that up a little bit. And I'm going to create a loop in this sampler. So I'm gonna try and find a part that I like. So I really want to have a part that has that kind of like oscillation going on. So that sounds nice. I'm gonna go and turn the shaper on, and really gonna make this quite distorted. So that sounds better. We can try playing around with this one. So, yeah, that sounds a little bit better now. Let's put in a little MIDI clip and let's see if we can turn this into something nice. Let's turn this to 12 semitones. Okay, we need to remove this pitch envelope and reset the pitch. And I can, for instance, do something like okay. Okay, so that's something we could do, for instance. Now we have... And the reese now sounds it still sounds good, and when we switches to mono, it still sounds perfect. So now we have a reese that sounds okay, but I wouldn't necessarily say this is the best reese out there. Let's try what happens if we repeat this. So, I guess this sounds good now. Well, better than it was already. Now would be a good moment to add a little bit of distortion to this. And now I would actually use isotope thresh to really do really specific distortion on maybe a specific set of frequencies. Because that's usually what you'll want to do. And that's not good at all. Okay. So that means that if I'm now gonna turn this, click this button, that live is gonna be completely turning off. Okay, well, I guess that is a little bit how this works. I guess I'll just stop this video right now, because we've pretty much turned this into a good reese. I might do another video where we're actually going to be talking about this even more. I might actually want to go and try to create a little bit more of a non-stabby reese sound, so a reese that is a little bit more the reese that you would normally hear in drum and bass, the more sustained kind of sound. That's a good one for the next video. If you like these kind of videos, then click the like button. Comment down below if you want me to do a video about a particular kind of sound. Let me know in the comments below. Also, subscribe to this channel if you want to see more of these videos, and if you do, be sure to click that little bell icon so that you get notified whenever one of my videos gets uploaded. Yeah, that's it. This channel is all about drum and bass and neurofunk, so if you want to see more about that, definitely follow this channel, and I hope to see you back soon. Peace!